Will it work? Okay. Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of SOL's 2023 webinar series featuring presentations on ecological land care. My name is Christine. I'm the Special Projects Lead with SOL. I'm happy to be your host today. I live in Ottawa, the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. SOL's webinar series is held every 2 weeks on Tuesdays at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. This month's theme is green spaces as sites for education and community engagement. You can find all of the themes for this series as well as the registration information on SOL's website. Before we begin with today's presentation, I'd like to mention that this webinar series and much of SOL's work is made possible by the generous and ongoing support of Gaia College, Canada's leading college for professional development and diploma courses in organic land care. SOL is also supported by its members, so if you haven't become a member yet, I invite you to do so. At the end of the presentation, we will open the floor for a question period. You may ask your questions via the chat function during or after the presentation, or by unmuting yourself and asking the questions directly. Please note that we are recording the session and it will be available afterwards on SOL's website at organiclandcare.ca. For today's presentation, I'm pleased to introduce Heidi Campbell from the national nonprofit organization Evergreen, who is here to present on the Gill Garden at the Evergreen Brickworks site in Toronto. Welcome, Heidi, and take it away.
Thank you very much. And I'm so pleased to be here to tell you a little bit about our little children's garden at Evergreen Brickworks. And I'll start with a little introduction to Evergreen and just set the context. So Evergreen is a national not-for-profit, and we're working to create cities that are livable, green, and prosperous. We've been in the work for about 30 years, facilitating change with communities through connection, innovation, and sustainable actions. We work with communities across sectors to solve some of the most pressing issues that cities are facing. These include climate change, housing affordability, and access to nature and public spaces. Okay, now I can't advance my slides. Just 1 minute. Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry for the delay. This is an image of the Brickworks site. This is Evergreen's home base, located in Toronto in our ravine system. This is a year-round destination where people come to experience sustainability in action. Once an industrial brick factory, it's internationally renowned showcase of green design, an award-winning public space, and a test site to pilot ideas that can be scaled across the country to shape our cities for a better future. Here we are in the children's garden at Evergreen Brickworks. It is designed to provide children and families of all ages, and it's a space to explore, experience, and connect with nature while encountering a natural palette of materials, native plants, and taking part in hands-on learning and stewardship opportunities. Some of the core tenets of our children's garden are food, water, shelter, and handwork. Food is a focus in our garden. We really focus on organic gardening and work with children in the gardens to create them, think about them, design them, and they, of course, interact with them on a daily basis. Water is a key driver. It is really about water conservation, but thinking about how, to move water around the garden spaces. And we have some different ways and techniques that we do that. We have a water studio as well, where children can experiment with water. And there's an Archimedean screw and a hand pump. The shelter tenet is really about thinking about habitat and that we all need shelter. All creatures need shelter. And what we do is provide a lot of loose parts for children to be able to build their own shelters. And this works out very nicely. They have a lot of very natural materials like logs and branches and even some natural burlap, and they just build their own little shelters. Handwork is really a focus on just that, on skills around using your hands to whittle, build fires, all kinds of different things, weaving, and there's lots of art making going on in the space as well. So if you come to visit, you'll see that the child's hand is really everywhere, displayed in the court through their work. So children are building, they're making, they're experimenting, solving problems, thinking creatively, and cooperating with others. The children's garden is really a child's domain, inspiring imagination and creativity in their own unique way, while gaining a deeper knowledge about themselves and the natural world. So again, it's just very immersive, very hands-on, lots of just free play, and children choose to do what they like to do, and they interact with other children, and it just spurs on all kinds of imaginative play and creativity. As you can see here, I've got this arrow pointing to our guild garden, which is at the very center of our children's garden. It's a very busy space, and this is kind of early days when we first got started. So the guild garden has gone through a few iterations, and I'll share that with you. So this was the very first garden. It's a grouping of plants that work together to ensure the health of the space. It's chosen to maximize biodiversity and yield. This was early days for this particular garden, as it was established in 2015. But in 2020, a new vision was created. Foresters Financial approached Evergreen with a proposal to create a space with a focus on growing food, supporting wildlife, and providing a place for kids and families to interact with nature. Working together, Evergreen, Forester staff, and the families that visit the space designed a new garden. And here's what we learned. We were thinking, at first we need to really ask ourselves some key questions. So I'm just sharing these with you today. And so, they're pretty basic, but it also, they're very specific to trying to think about what this guild garden would be in this particular space, which is the child's domain. So these were helping us kind of make a plan. Can you think of the last garden you saw? What did it look like? Did it have any native plants? Was it easy for children to interact with? Was there anything that could be harvested or eaten? Because too often gardens are created to fit a certain aesthetic and budget without considering how they can support pollinators, create local food systems, or make a space for children to play in. So we were trying to conceive of something that was very resilient. And so we thought up a kind of a new focus for the garden was for it to be a food forest guild. And so we wanted to really think about this very carefully and try to think about what the companion plants would be and how they would support fruit trees in particular. So I wanted to share some of the benefits, of course, of these gardens, and particularly the Food Forest Guild. We were looking at particular goals. We wanted to boost biodiversity. We wanted to provide additional yields, create shade and suppress weeds, and reduce moisture loss in particular. Because this is a reclaimed brick making factory, there's a lot of brick still there, and the buildings have brick facades, and a courtyard in particular can get very warm and very dry. So we were looking at this particular condition very, very carefully when we were conceiving of the garden. Another benefit was we wanted to highlight how the garden could take up water and nutrients, not directly accessible to the trees. So that again was one of the goals of the guild. We wanted to choose plants that would repel pests and species, and having, these plants play a role in keeping the fruit trees safe. And of course, again, to attract pollinators and other beneficial wildlife. Because we're on a ravine, there is a lot of wildlife, but we were in particular trying to bring that wildlife, some of it anyway, into the guild garden, and into the children's garden specifically. And we have some really interesting kind of animals that come and go. One in particular is a turtle, and she comes every year, and she lays her eggs in the children's garden. She digs a hole in the gravel, and she lays her eggs there. And so every year we put up protective fencing for her. But I think she's feeling very comfortable in the space because it is very green. So some of the plants that I wanted to share with you are listed here. An existing cherry tree was chosen as the center of the new garden, which was then surrounded by about 25 different plant species, including berries, vegetables, and herbs. So many of the seedlings for the garden were grown on site at the Brickworks. We have a small children's greenhouse in this space, and it can be very productive. And thanks to generous funding from our sponsor, we were able to improve our existing greenhouse, and we were able to grow a lot more plants. And I've highlighted here that we added some other fruit trees, the pear and the plum. Here's a continued list, and just a little shot of the forester's financial staff coming and working in the garden and helping us build this new rendition of the garden. So you can see there's quite a variety of herbs and flowering plants, and particularly some plants that will repel pests, like the marigold. So of course we have to think about designing for kids. And so designing a resilient food-focused garden was obviously the vision, but the children's garden team also had to consider how to make it fun. So smells, textures, colors, tastes. This new garden design has it all from that sensory perspective. Also, by playing and interacting with the garden, there's plenty of opportunities for children to learn about the importance of growing local food. Most kids don't know that there's a different way to grow food than monocrops in a field. The garden helps them to experience that they can grow different plants altogether. The way we farm and grow food is changing, and we want kids to be prepared for that by involving them in innovative and holistic food forest gardens like this one. So you can see that there's a log in the center with a little hole cut out. And so it's really interesting because when we asked the children who participated in the build and the imagining and the build of this garden, what they would like to see, and what kind of their preferences were, we realized that in the activities that we were doing with them, they were building a lot of shelters, and they liked the fact that they could sort of retreat somewhere into their little shelter out of kind of the rigors of play. So we transferred that idea into the garden, and we created this little kind of hiding place, I guess, but it's actually, it's got as you can see, it's got a pass through, so you can see in from all angles. And but they love it, and the little ones just crawl in there, and they can sit in there in twos or threes. So it's quite an attractive point in this particular garden. There's also little pathways that they can follow with little rope kind of fencing, and so that they don't damage the plants. But it's quite a maze in here, so it's quite exciting. And one of the Foresters staff, I really wanted to share this quote with you because I feel like it kind of really wraps up and really emphasizes kind of the importance of these gardens. So she was saying regenerative agricultural practices like food forests and looking to learn from nature's wisdom will help us collectively correct course and ensure a viable future for all. So thank you. Thank you for your time. I'm going to stick around if there's questions, of course. And there's also a Vimeo video online for you to check out. And it actually gets very detailed on how to build a guild garden. Not the forest garden, but just kind of like a native plant and herb plant guild. So I hope you can check it out. And thanks very much for your attention today.
Okay, Heidi, thank you very much for this beautiful presentation of this wonderful site full of creativity and holistic thinking in terms of its design and its use. And I'm going to start us off with a couple questions, but I ask if anybody has them, they can indicate if they'd like to ask in the chat or if they want to unmute and ask a question. But what I'd like to know, and this is so much about the children's perspective and wishes for a garden, but what I find interesting too is perhaps the added consequence of having a garden such as this, and that is the influence of the child who and the families that accompany the child for the most part, and how much this can translate into sort of inspiring people to design or think about their own garden spaces, either in public parks near them or in private space, that they can kind of continue to do that same type of forest gardening, which would have
Yeah.
different layers. Have you noticed, or do you keep track or try to get feedback on whether or not this is translated into more people's interests at different ages?
Yeah, what's interesting is the guild garden, at least the forest guild garden, is adjacent. And this is something we think about as designers, is adjacencies and how the energy flows from one activity or one activity area to another. And
Yeah.
right adjacent to this garden is a sand play area that's quite vast. And it has like a little water play feature and a big shade sail. So what happens is a lot of people sit on the edge of the sand play, which also shares an edge with the guild garden. So the behavior is let's just hang out, have a coffee, and our kids are playing. And more kids come and more families come, and it becomes this big kind of social gathering of toddlers and parents, and they're right there, and the children are reaching over and picking like sometimes little leaves off the plants or interacting with the garden. And often when I'm there, I'll be sort of circulating around, and people, like, there's always something to see. There's always something blooming or starting to bloom, or a little sprout coming up. And people always, they're always talking about, because they're sitting there, they're kind of talking about the garden, and then their children interact with it, and then they're more interested in, oh, what is that plant, and is it toxic, sometimes comes up, or what is this, and then you can have a conversation. And they have conversations with each other about the plants. I've seen people say, oh, I grow this at home, but I have a different version of it. And then our staff are very knowledgeable, and they're always circulating around. And what I've heard from them is that people are quite interested in how to keep fruit trees. Not, one of the main questions is, how do you keep these fruit trees pest free? Because I think people love fruit, like some people love fruit trees and they want to grow them, but they're afraid that they have to use a lot of pesticides and different non-organic kind of chemicals. And so of course we don't use any of that. And so the guild garden is this relationship, like hub of relationships between plants. And you can really expound on that with people, and they're fascinated by it. I'm not sure they're transferring it to their home gardens, but I'd imagine if we're getting that much interest in it, that they're doing something at home, even if it's a balcony
Yeah.
guild. They can do small guilds. They can do, we also talk about that. It's not just about this big scale, and you have to have a big scale. But yeah, I think there's lots of interest.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So you're saying that there are staff that circulate, so they're always on site, and do they also answer questions related to the pollinators that perhaps are visiting and visible?
Yeah. And so our staff are trained outdoor educators. And they're also kind of like, I don't know if you know the term play worker, but they're that kind of ilk of educator. So they're watching and they're circulating and they're actually setting up provocations every once in a while to see if they can provoke different types of play, but they don't get involved. Like they let the children really choose what they're most interested in, and they might set out something and then children get involved in that, like loose parts. And but often what happens this time of year is there's lots of seed planting. So the beds are getting prepared. So you'll come, I don't know if you've seen this on a spring weekend, but you arrive and there'll be some little tiny seedlings to plant in the greenhouse, but there's also like lots of seeds to put into the garden beds. And so the staff are really engaged in helping the children be involved and be immersed in the growth and emergent qualities of the garden, if you will.
Well, it also sounds like what would be of interest, probably from the visitor's perspective, is to visit it over time, knowing
Yes.
that the garden, it's seasonal. Yes, if the seedlings go in, or they're
Yeah.
start from seed to go in, and then harvest happens at a certain time, that you have repeat visitors probably quite
Yeah.
often. Yeah.
Yeah. And we do ask the kids, you know, some come for like March break camp and some come for winter camp. And we do ask them kind of early on, like, what kind of gardens would you like to see, or, and then we think up themes with them. Like in past years, we've had like a dinosaur garden and had dinosaur kale and like giant plants and different things. It's sort of that follow different themes. We had a sip and snack garden where you could pull things off and like make teas, but you could sniff things, and I don't know, it was all very sensory. um yeah, and if you come in different seasons, there's all kinds of different things to kind of see. Even in the winter we have things under wraps, like you can lift up a little, kind of like a little, what would you call it, it's like a planting like cover, and you can see the greens under there.
Yeah.
So it's like a little kind of hide and seek game. Anyway, yeah, there's lots going on there to kind of spark people's imagination and creativity all year round.
Well, what you said in your presentation too about the idea that this, well, and someone said course correct, or just like another way
Yeah,
to grow food, and urban growing food. And also just that there is maybe a gap in knowledge from people who believe that you might need to have some type of pesticides if you're growing fruit trees. Like those are all information that it's not always common in terms of the general population. So yeah, one question we have in the chat is, are there signage or resources that people can also see on site or take away, just to sort of help continue that learning and appreciation for the approach that you've taken to designing and caring with organic land care practices, that need to be imparted more widely into the population?
yeah. That's a really good question. And I do know that there is some signage, but I feel we could definitely do a better job. But we also have to, we're sort of trying to be careful not to put too much signage up, because it gets, it can be competing.
Yeah.
And so we're this is a really good nut to crack in our next iteration. Like we're going through a bit of renovation, so we're thinking about that kind of angle. We also have, like at evergreen.ca, we have resources online that are associated with the children's garden. And there's activity guides and those kinds of things. I think too, like our garden market, if you walk into the garden market, we have so many staff that are so knowledgeable about different plants and different plant guilds, and what what kind of organic treatments you can use with your plants, and which ones you might start in a pollinator garden or a butterfly garden with your kids. So I would say if you're at the site, I would visit the Evergreen Garden Market and see what's on display, and talk to the staff there too, just about these kinds of questions, because I think they offer a lot.
Yeah, and probably also just the whole idea of what you're saying about the biodiversity. So
Yeah,
maximizing biodiversity, actually maximizing yield as well, and just the
yeah,
value of having something that is diverse for the people visiting, but also what is on site and who it's serving. So all of the other creatures that are coming to visit. I love the story about the turtle. That's very nice.
yeah. And I had another story I was going to tell about the beavers. Like, we have so many beavers, and they love aspen. So they're taking a lot of the aspen down around our ponds and stuff. But it's interesting for the kids, and they see that they're building their dams with the aspen, and they basically chew on the bark, and then they lug these big branches around. And it's really a very dynamic site that way. And so the children's garden is like just a kind of a blended extension of the ravine system. And that kind of where the city grid hits the ravine. It's like we're right at the crossroad there.
Yeah,
So it's quite a dynamic site that way.
it is. And I appreciate what you said too about the kids' sort of innate interest in shelter and how there is this 100-year-old hollow oak log that they can
Yeah,
go. And that's just a nice thing to actually then, yeah, present, well, the needs for all species to have shelter. So it's a nice way for people to recognize their own needs and how that has to apply, and how there's been an invasion in space and in habitat for other species. And this is just a way to live all together, humans with other
yeah.
organisms.
Absolutely. And we have a little cob house that's built. I don't know if you know the ingredients of cob, but it's like straw, sand, clay, and water, and you mix it into this building material. And we had several children involved in building this little house. And then we established a green roof on it as well. And now the green roof, it basically is engulfing the cob house now. The green roof's kind of grown out and down around. And it's basically like a little cocoon around this little mud house. And it's just another example of how you can use like earth and just natural materials to kind of build a pretty robust shelter. I mean, I know people build they do earthworks like that and build homes that way. And again, just thinking about architecture and animal architecture and
Yeah.
our architecture, and how we can kind of blend the two and have interesting dialogue around that.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So when you say that, well, this Evergreen Brickwork site it's the home base for Evergreen, but Evergreen is national in the sense that it is
Yeah.
influencing and being part of those conversations in other towns and cities across the country. So, and do you know if there are other gardens that have sort of been modeled on Evergreen's Guild Garden or the wider children's garden in other cities?
Yeah, I know that in other communities, particularly the ones that I know that are close by, like Peterborough, Ontario, there's an ecology park there, and they have these types of gardens. And what I'm finding now is also with the schools. I mean, we're a national not-for-profit, so we've had in the past we had a very robust learning grounds program, and so we were working with schools across Canada, 6,000 plus, as a matter of fact, and those were all projects that were related to outdoor classrooms, uh, gardens, community gardens, etc. And so all the learnings, it's kind of, you learn from these different regions too, what they need regionally. And so there's sort of a basic kind of understanding of like, a basic framework like guild gardening. And then you can add in, like we did, we turned our guild garden into a forest guild. So then there could be specific things for specific regions. And so that's what we were finding with our school ground work, is that lots of educators, teachers, even administrators, but like parents mostly were leading these kinds of gardens, and they were showing up in school grounds across Canada. And we delivered like information seminars and webinars with different experts that were in those regions, and so then they would share with other regions. So anyway, we set, like Soul has done, set up this kind of knowledge sharing base, and so that was really good. That was good in a way because we had a lot of conversations, and people learned a lot from each other. So yeah, I think, to your question, many communities are picking this up, and really Evergreen's very involved in the school ground realm. So there you are, you're right there with families and kids in communities growing gardens in a public space.
Well, and that's you bring me to the point where, so 2 weeks ago on this webinar series, we were talking to the principal at Irma Coulson Public
Yeah.
Schools, Climate Ready School. So that was a very interesting conversation, and that recording is also on Soul's website. So we would like people to visit that one as well. And since, they were actively involved with Evergreen to design and implement, and now just track it, observe the way that the community has moved in to also take over and to participate in the evolution of the site. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, and when I was at Irma Coulson Public School just about 2 weeks ago, and walking the site with Cheryl, and we found like several bird nests. And I don't know if she mentioned, but there was a duck nesting under one of the decks. So the wildlife's moving back into that area.
And coexisting, like that's the nice part, is there's hopefully room for everyone to realize that we can design spaces, and especially in our communities that are in the public spaces, public realm, that can be for multiple species at the same time.
Very important point.
Well, we're really appreciative that you did this today, and we're grateful that this Guild Garden is one of the sites that was recognized by Soul in 2022 as a green space. So recognizing the fact that you've worked hard for the biodiversity part and the soil and the plant health, everything taken care of in a way that is healthy and regenerative. So we thank you very much, Heidi, for today's conversation. And we look forward to our next upcoming month, which is going to be featuring Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous-led stewardship in different green spaces. So we have someone presenting from Ottawa next week, and then 2 weeks after that from Vancouver. So we look forward to those presentations. Please check them out on our website. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.